Just after 1 in the morning, a businessman in Van Meter, Iowa, looked toward the center of town and noticed a bright light moving across the rooftops. At first, it may have looked like someone carrying a lantern. Then the light changed direction. It crossed from one building to another without anyone visible beneath it. And over the next several nights, that strange light would become the least disturbing part of the story. A local doctor claimed he came face to face with an 8-foot winged figure that projected a blinding beam from its head. A bank employee reportedly found enormous 3-toed tracks, and 2 men said they watched the creature descend a telephone pole. And eventually, a group of armed residents followed not one, but 2 of the creatures to a coal mine outside of town. They opened fire, and according to the story, the bullets did absolutely nothing. Today, we're looking at the Van Meter Visitor. Van Meter sits west of Des Moines, Iowa. Today, it's close enough to the city that you could drive between them without thinking much about the distance. But in 1903, Van Meter was a small railroad and mining community. A contemporary newspaper account described it as a town of roughly 1,000 people. This matters because the witnesses in the story were not presented as anonymous travelers passing through the area. There were local businessmen, a doctor, a bank employee, and men connected to the town's mine. At least, that's how the newspaper introduced them. And the first named witness was a man named U.G. Griffith. Late one night near the end of September, Griffith reportedly noticed a light above the Mather and Gregg building in the center of town. It was bright enough to attract his attention from a distance. But instead of staying in one place, the light moved across the top of the building. Then it appeared on another roof. Griffith could not see anyone holding it. He could not make out a body. He saw only the light moving through places where a person should not have been able to walk. And eventually, it disappeared. By itself, this would have been a strange but fairly ordinary story. Maybe someone was on a roof. Maybe Griffith misjudged the distance. Maybe the light was coming from somewhere behind the buildings. But the following night, a local physician named Dr. Alcott reportedly saw what was carrying it. According to the newspaper account, Alcott was walking when he noticed the same intense light. This time, it was approaching him. As it came closer, he began to see a body behind it. The figure was described as approximately 8 feet tall, with large wings and a blunt horn-like projection on its forehead. The beam seemed to come from that projection. Some later descriptions make it sound almost mechanical, like a searchlight attached to the creature's head. Alcott also reported an overpowering odor. Not simply the smell of an animal, but something strong enough to leave him disoriented and sick. The figure came close enough that he pulled out a gun and fired. But the creature did not fall. According to the story, it barely reacted. Alcott retreated into a nearby building, locked himself inside, and remained there until morning. Now this is the moment where the Van Meter story becomes difficult to dismiss as one person seeing a distant bird. But it is also where we have to be careful. We don't have Dr. Alcott's original handwritten statement. What survives is a newspaper telling us what Alcott supposedly said. That is evidence, but it's not the same thing as independently preserved testimony. The next encounter was connected to the local bank. A man identified in retellings as Mr. Dunn reportedly saw the light near or inside the building. Again, the exact details change depending on the version. But the following morning, large 3-toed tracks were allegedly discovered. The newspaper story claimed that plaster casts were made. Those casts would be the strongest physical evidence in the entire case. Unfortunately, no verified casts are known to survive. There are no authenticated photographs of them. There's no museum holding them. We have a report that physical evidence existed, but not the evidence itself. And that difference is going to be important. By this point, Van Meter had 3 ingredients that can turn an unusual sighting into a town-wide panic. There was a mysterious light. There was a respected witness claiming he had seen a creature. And there were supposed tracks that people could gather around and examine. Then came one of the strongest encounters in the story. 2 men, O.V. White and Sidney Gregg, reportedly saw the figure near a telephone pole. This time, witnesses described more than just wings and a light. The creature was said to have a beak-like face and powerful legs. Some versions say it moved in long jumps resembling a kangaroo. The figure supposedly descended the pole and moved away through the darkness. Gunfire was reported again, and once again it apparently had no effect. Notice how the story is escalating. The first witness sees only a light. The next sees a body. Then tracks appear. Then multiple people see the creature moving at close range. That progression could mean the reports were becoming clearer as more witnesses encountered the same thing, It could also mean that every new telling was adding detail to a story the town already knew. Both possibilities have to remain open. The final confrontation centered on the local coal mine. A mine supervisor identified as J.L. Pratt reportedly heard unusual sounds coming from the area. By then, enough people had heard the stories that a group of armed residents assembled and went to investigate. This time, witnesses allegedly saw two creatures. One was larger, the other was smaller. The implication was that the town may not have been dealing with one wandering animal, but a pair using the mine as shelter. The men opened fire. The creature supposedly released the same intense light and foul odor before retreating toward the mine. Some later versions claim that residents sealed the entrance afterward. That detail is reported often, but it's not supported as clearly as the basic newspaper account of the confrontation. What the early story does say is that after the creatures disappeared into the mine area, the encounter stopped. No body was recovered, no clear photograph was taken, no preserved feather, bone, or track cast has surfaced. The Van Meter visitors simply disappeared from the record almost as quickly as it arrived. So what do we actually have? We have a newspaper story published in 1903, close to the time the encounters allegedly occurred. That's considerably stronger than a legend first written down 50 years later. The article included names, businesses, and specific locations. It described the town as being terrified and treated the sightings as a continuing local event. But there's a major problem. Most of the detailed Van Meter narrative appears to flow from that single sensational account and its later repetition. One newspaper can preserve a real event. It can also preserve a joke, a misunderstanding, or a reporter's embellishment. Contemporary does not automatically mean accurate. The first possibility is that the entire thing was a newspaper tall tale. Small-town newspapers in this period sometimes published exaggerated stories for entertainment, publicity, or circulation. The strange searchlight, the odor, and bullets having no effect at all almost sounds perfectly designed to make the creature impossible to explain. But a complete fabrication would mean attaching recognizable local names to events that supposedly never happened. That was possible, but risky if the people involved strongly objected. The second possibility is that several ordinary incidents were combined. A large owl, heron, or other bird could explain wings, a beak-like face, unusual movement, and three-toed tracks. A lantern, distant light, or equipment near the mine could explain the beam. Fear and repeated storytelling could connect separate observations into one creature, and this explanation is less exciting, but it matches the way folklore often develops. A real light, a real animal, real noises near a mine, then one story tying them all together. The third possibility is that witnesses encountered an unknown or badly misidentified animal. That does not require accepting every detail literally. A frightened witness estimating an animal's height in darkness could easily be wrong. A reflective eye or light behind the animal might become a beam coming from its head. But even with those allowances, the complete description remains difficult to fit to any known Iowa animal. And then there's the final possibility that the newspaper printed the story because the people of Van Meter genuinely believed something unknown had been moving through their town. Not necessarily a supernatural monster, not necessarily an 8-foot creature with a biological searchlight, but something real enough to make armed men go looking for it. The Van Meter visitor is not compelling because it proves that a winged monster lived in an Iowa coal mine. It doesn't. It is compelling because in 1903, a newspaper placed named townsmen on the record describing something that should not have existed. The physical evidence vanished. The creature vanished. And more than a century later, we're left trying to decide whether the record preserved an encounter or simply preserved the birth of a legend. I keep coming back to one question. If this was only a newspaper joke, how much of Van Meter was in on it? And if it wasn't a joke, what did those people actually see? Tell me which explanation you believe: an animal, a hoax, a collection of unrelated events, or something genuinely unknown. And the next strange on record case is even harder to dismiss as a simple sighting, because people did not just claim they just saw something. They woke up and found its path crossing an entire section of England, over walls, across rooftops, and through places no ordinary animal should have been able to reach.